I died for 15 minutes, and in that time, I stood before God Himself. I asked the question that had haunted me my entire life. Was Jesus really your son? His answer shattered everything I thought I knew. What I saw, what I heard, and what I was told will change the way you see eternity forever. My name is Emily Nathan, and for most of my life, I believed in God, or at least I wanted to. I had spent years searching for spiritual truth, reading about different religions, studying ancient texts, and attending various places of worship. But one question always lingered in my heart, an unanswered mystery that kept me from fully committing to any one faith. Was Jesus really the Son of God, or just a great teacher? I was raised in a household where faith was encouraged, but never strictly defined. My parents believed in God but weren't particularly religious. We attended church on holidays, but beyond that, my exposure to Christianity was limited. As I grew older, my curiosity about spirituality deepened, but instead of finding answers, I encountered more questions. Why did different religions have such contrasting views on God? Why did some claim Jesus was divine, while others insisted He was merely a prophet? Why did some believers seem so certain while I felt only doubt? I had dabbled in Buddhism, studied Hinduism, and even explored New Age spiritualism, seeking peace and enlightenment. I respected Jesus, of course. He was undoubtedly one of history's most influential figures, a man of profound wisdom and compassion. But was He truly the Son of God? That question haunted me, and no matter where I searched, I couldn't find a satisfying answer. I occasionally attended church services, but they left me feeling disconnected. Some preachers spoke of Jesus as the Savior, but my skeptical mind couldn't fully embrace it. Others spoke of Him merely as a wise teacher, which made sense, but something about that explanation felt incomplete. Then came the retreat. A friend had invited me to a weekend spiritual retreat designed to help people deepen their connection to God, no matter their faith background. It was held in a quiet, wooded area, with peaceful meditations, discussions on divine energy, and workshops on the power of prayer. I went in hoping for clarity, some kind of breakthrough that would finally settle the questions in my heart. But even after a weekend of reflection, I left feeling just as uncertain as before. Was Jesus God's son? Or was He simply a figure misinterpreted by history? The drive home was quiet. The road stretched long and empty before me as I replayed the weekend's discussions in my head. It was late afternoon, the golden sun casting a soft glow across the landscape. I sighed, gripping the wheel, frustration creeping into my thoughts. If you're real, I muttered under my breath, if Jesus is really your son, show me. I don't want blind faith. I want truth. I didn't expect an answer. Then, in the span of a heartbeat, everything changed. Out of nowhere, a large truck barreled into my lane. My breath caught. There was no time to swerve, no time to react. A deafening impact, a flash of pain, like fire ripping through my body. A scream, maybe mine, maybe someone else's. Then silence. A strange, eerie silence, like the world had been muted. I was no longer in my car, no longer in pain, no longer in the world I had always known. I had died, and I was about to learn the truth in a way I never could have imagined. I opened my eyes, but I wasn't in my car. At first, I didn't understand what had happened. Everything around me was still, too still. There was no pain, no sound, just a strange, weightless sensation. I could see, but not with my eyes. I could feel, but not with my body. Then I looked down. Below me, I saw the wreckage. My car was a mangled mess of metal and shattered glass, resting at the edge of the road. Paramedics surrounded the scene, working frantically. And there, in the middle of it all, was me. My lifeless body was slumped over, bloodied and broken, and yet, I was here, floating above it. I should have felt fear, panic, desperation, but I didn't. Instead, I felt peace, a kind of peace I had never known before. It was deeper than any meditation, stronger than any comfort I had ever sought. It wasn't just the absence of fear. It was the presence of something greater, something warm, infinite, and overwhelmingly good. I felt weightless, unburdened. There was no more worry, no more uncertainty. The confusion of life, My questions, my doubts, my search for truth, all seemed so distant now. Then, something changed. A force, gentle yet irresistible, began pulling me upward. At first, I resisted, trying to make sense of it all. But as I allowed myself to surrender, I was lifted higher, away from the accident scene, away from the world I had always known. And then, I saw the light. It wasn't just a bright glow. It was alive. It pulsed and shimmered, like golden waves of love flowing through an endless horizon. It wasn't something I merely saw. It was something I felt in the deepest part of my being. Then, I became aware of them. Figures of radiant light surrounded me. They weren't human, yet they felt familiar, like old friends I had somehow forgotten. They didn't speak with words, yet I understood them as if they had whispered directly into my soul. Welcome, their presence seemed to say, full of warmth and understanding. I wasn't afraid. I knew, without a doubt, that these beings had been with me my entire life, watching over me, guiding me in ways I had never realized. Then, the life review began. In an instant, my entire existence unfolded before me, not in a series of memories, but as a living, breathing experience. I saw every choice I had ever made, every word I had spoken, every thought I had held. But what struck me most wasn't the actions themselves, it was the impact. I saw moments I had long forgotten. The time I offered a kind word to a struggling coworker, how it had rippled into their life and given them hope. The time I ignored a homeless man on the street, how my indifference deepened his despair. The time I comforted a grieving friend, how that love carried forward into the lives of others. Every interaction, no matter how small, had mattered. Nothing was insignificant. There was no condemnation, only understanding. No punishment, only truth. I saw myself fully, as I truly was, not as I had imagined myself to be. And then, the review shifted. I saw the moments when I had prayed, not the rehearsed, empty prayers, but the real ones, the desperate cries of my heart. And I saw how those prayers had been heard. Every single one, the unanswered ones, the whispered ones, the ones I had forgotten about. God had heard them all. Tears welled in my soul as I realized how deeply I had been known all along. Then, the light shifted, expanding, growing in intensity until it became everything. A vast, immeasurable presence filled the space before me. It was greater than the light, greater than the beings of radiance, greater than anything I had ever known. I knew instantly, this was God. The weight of it was overwhelming, not in terror, but in awe. I felt as though I stood before the very essence of life itself, before the one who had formed the stars, the galaxies, the very breath in my lungs. And yet, there was love. Not just love as I had known it on earth, conditional, fleeting, sometimes fragile. This was love in its purest, most complete form. It filled every part of me, washing away every doubt, every fear, every hesitation. It was as if I had been searching for this love my entire life, and now, standing before it, I realized I had never truly understood what love even was. For the first time, I knew. I felt my soul tremble as a question burned within me. The question that had haunted me for so many years. Was Jesus really the Son of God? Here, in this place of infinite knowledge and truth, I would finally receive my answer. I gathered my courage, preparing to ask the one who knew all things. I opened my soul, and with every fiber of my being, I asked the question, God, was Jesus your son? The answer I received shook me to my core. I stood before him. Every human concept of God that I had ever heard, read, or imagined crumbled in an instant. He was not distant. He was not a vague force. He was not just energy or some impersonal presence. He was alive, real, and overwhelmingly personal, and I was standing in his presence. It was impossible to describe the full weight of what I felt. Power beyond comprehension, love deeper than the oceans, truth so absolute that nothing could be hidden. I didn't just see God, I felt him. His presence filled everything, every space, every thought, every part of my being. It was as if every fiber of my soul recognized him, even though my mind had doubted him for years. In that moment, All my questions seemed so small compared to the magnitude of who he was. But one question still burned inside me, the one I had never truly answered, the question that had followed me my entire life, the one that held the key to everything. I hesitated, trembling before the one who knew everything about me. Every doubt, every moment of faith and faithlessness, every whispered prayer, every time I had turned away. And yet, there was no condemnation in his presence, only truth. I took a breath, if I even had breath in this place, and finally spoke. Was Jesus truly your son? The moment the question left my soul, everything around me changed. Instead of speaking a simple yes or no, God showed me the truth. A vision unfolded before me, not just images, but reality itself. Suddenly, I was standing in the ancient past. I saw a young woman, Mary, trembling before a divine messenger. I could feel her heart race with awe and humility as she was told she would bear the Son of God. I was there when Jesus was born, not as a distant observer, but as if I had stepped into that moment of history. I saw the dirt of the manger, the glow of the star above, the quiet, holy night where divinity wrapped itself in human frailty. I watched him grow, his childhood, his laughter, his moments of solitude with his Father. I saw that he was more than a man. Then I was in the midst of his ministry, walking among the crowds, feeling their hunger, not just for food, but for something eternal. I watched as Jesus healed the sick with just a touch, calmed storms with a whisper, and looked into people's eyes with a love so pure it burned through every lie, every wound, every sin. I saw how people rejected him. I saw the moment Judas betrayed him, the sadness in his eyes, not anger, not hatred, but sorrow for the one who turned away. Then I saw the crucifixion, but not the way I had imagined it. I didn't just see him on the cross. I felt the weight of it. I felt the nails piercing his hands and feet, not just physically, but spiritually. I saw sin itself being transferred onto him. The darkness, the hatred, the lies, the rejection, the brokenness of the entire world falling upon him like a crushing wave. And yet, he took it willingly. I heard his final cry, not just as words, but as the deepest agony I had ever known. It is finished. At that moment, I understood something that shattered me to my core. He wasn't just a prophet. He wasn't just a teacher. He was God's own essence poured into human form. He was the heart of God, given to the world. Then I saw the resurrection. I watched as the stone rolled away, as light exploded from the tomb, as he stood victorious over death itself. And in that moment, I knew why the world could never erase him. I knew why history itself revolved around his name. I knew why even those who denied him still felt the weight of his presence in their souls. And then, I heard God's voice again. But this time, it was different. It wasn't just a voice. It was a truth that pierced through my very being. He is not just my son. He is my heart, given for you. I collapsed to my knees. Everything in me, every question, every resistance, every argument, was silenced. I had spent my life searching for truth, for enlightenment, for something that could explain the meaning of existence. And here, standing before the very source of all existence, I realized I had missed it. Jesus was not just a historical figure, not just a wise man, not just a teacher. He was the very essence of God, stepping into human flesh, choosing to suffer, choosing to die, choosing me. Tears streamed down my soul, if such a thing was possible in this place. I had spent so many years trying to figure it all out, debating theology, questioning religion, waiting for a sign that Jesus was who he claimed to be. And all along, he was the sign. His love, his sacrifice, his resurrection. It had always been there, waiting for me to see it. I looked back up at God, shaking, overwhelmed. And for the first time in my entire life, I whispered the words I had never truly spoken before. Jesus, I believe. The moment I said it, a flood of love unlike anything I had ever known washed over me. It wasn't just peace. It wasn't just clarity. It was a connection that filled every empty space inside of me, every longing, every wound, every missing piece of my soul. I had spent my entire life looking for something greater than myself, And now, I had found it. Or rather, he had found me. I wept, not out of sorrow, but out of a joy too deep for words. I understood now. Everything began and ended with Jesus. I had spent my life searching, but the answer had always been in front of me. Now, I knew. And I knew that this truth wasn't just for me. It was for everyone. I turned back to God, my soul still trembling, and before I could even ask, he already knew. You must go back. The light around me pulsed, growing even brighter. Tell them what you have seen. My heart ached. I didn't want to leave, but I knew I had to. I had been given the greatest revelation of my life. Now, I had to share it. And just as I accepted this mission, everything faded into darkness. The warmth of God's presence was overwhelming. I wanted to remain in this moment forever, but then something changed. Suddenly, the radiant light around me dimmed. The overwhelming love remained, but now there was something else, an urgency, a sorrow. I felt the shift before I even saw it. God was about to show me something I didn't want to see but needed to understand. I braced myself as the peaceful realm around me disappeared. I was no longer in the light. Instead, I stood in what felt like a space between worlds, a place where cries of regret echoed like whispers in the wind. At first, I couldn't see anything clearly, but then I heard them. Voices. So many voices. Some were screaming. Others were weeping. But all of them carried the same agonizing regret. Then the vision sharpened, and I saw faces, people, countless souls in darkness. I knew without being told. These were people who had rejected Jesus. Some had never believed. Others had ignored him, thinking they had time to turn back. I heard them crying out, "I thought I had more time. I was going to seek him, just not yet." I needed more proof. I was too busy living my life. Their agony wasn't just in their words, it was in their eyes. Eyes filled with regret. Eyes that had once seen the truth, but turned away. I realized something that made my heart ache. They hadn't been sent here against their will. They had chosen this fate by rejecting the only one who could save them. Then, the vision shifted again. This time, I wasn't looking at those who had completely rejected Jesus. I was looking at people who claimed to believe, but never truly surrendered. I saw churches filled with people, singing, clapping, listening to sermons, but their hearts were empty. I saw Christians who went to church every Sunday but never truly knew Jesus. They prayed when they needed something. They thanked God when life was good. But when it required sacrifice, obedience, or faith, they turned away. I watched as their lives flashed before me. A woman who attended church out of habit but never sought God's presence. A man who called himself a Christian but never lived it. He was more focused on his business and wealth. A pastor who watered down the gospel, making it comfortable instead of convicting. I saw their final moments on earth, the moment they stepped into eternity, expecting to be welcomed into heaven, only to realize they had never truly followed Jesus. Their shock was unbearable. Their own self-deception had led them here. They thought they knew him. They thought attending church, doing good deeds, and believing in God was enough. But it wasn't. Then, I heard God's voice again. This time, filled with deep sorrow. So many hear the truth, but they refuse to see. They want proof, but their hearts are closed. I trembled as his words filled my soul. "It is not enough to know of my son. You must know him." I felt those words pierce through me like lightning. All my life, I had been searching for truth, trying to understand Jesus instead of truly knowing him. And I wasn't alone. The world is full of people who acknowledge Jesus but do not surrender to him. It is not enough to say his name. It is not enough to believe he existed. You must give your life to him. You must follow him. You must love him. I wept, because I knew that so many people would hear this truth and still ignore it. Then, I saw Earth from a higher perspective. I saw the world as it is today, distracted, deceived, and divided. People were running toward money, pleasure, and power, but ignoring their eternity. I saw Christians arguing over petty things while souls were being lost. I saw churches compromising, watering down the gospel to please the world instead of God. I saw false teachings spreading, people twisting scripture to fit their desires, leading millions into deception. I saw people consumed by entertainment, by success, by things that would never last, while completely ignoring the one thing that mattered most. And then, I saw something even more terrifying. I saw a great deception coming, one that would blind many. I didn't fully understand it, but I knew. People would believe lies instead of seeking the truth. The world would turn even further from God. Many who thought they were safe would be lost because they refused to surrender. I saw people mocking God, denying Jesus, turning against everything he stood for, and they didn't even realize they were being deceived. I wanted to cry out, to warn them, but would they listen? Would they wake up before it was too late? Or would they continue to ignore the truth until there was no time left? I fell to my knees, sobbing. The weight of what I had seen was unbearable. So many people I loved, people I knew, were completely unprepared for eternity. I turned back to God, my voice trembling. Lord, what can be done? His answer came, not as anger, but as a plea filled with love and urgency. They must seek my son now, not tomorrow, not when it is convenient, not when they have finished chasing the world. Now, I saw a wave of urgency spread across the world. God was calling his people back. He was warning them to return to him before it was too late. He was giving them time, but that time was running out. And then, I understood. This was why I had been shown all of this. This was why I had to return. I turned back to God, my heart breaking. I didn't want to leave his presence, but I knew my purpose now. Go, God commanded. Tell them what you have seen. Tell them that time is short. Tell them to seek me before it is too late. Tears streamed down my face. I knew that not everyone would listen. I knew that some would mock me, reject me, or call me crazy, but I had seen the truth, and I had no choice but to warn them. A final wave of love surrounded me, and then, everything faded into darkness. I knelt before the presence of God, my heart overwhelmed by the weight of everything I had seen. I had finally received the truth I had spent my life searching for. Jesus was not just a man. He was not just a great teacher. He was God's heart, given for us, the only way, the only truth, the only life. And now, I had seen what happened to those who ignored this truth. I didn't want to leave. I wanted to stay in this place of perfect peace, perfect love, perfect truth. But then, God spoke again, and his words shattered the longing in my soul. Your time is not yet over. I looked up, my spirit trembling. Lord, I whispered, please, let me stay here with you. His presence was unlike anything I had ever known. There was no sorrow here, no fear, no doubt. There was only him. But I already knew the answer before he spoke. I was being sent back to the world that had rejected him, back to the people who had ignored his call, back to the distractions, the deception, the blindness. A tearless sob racked through me. How could I return to that? How could I leave the very presence of God? But then, he spoke again. You must tell them before it is too late. His voice was not angry, not forceful, but full of sorrow and urgency. They must know the truth before the time runs out. I lowered my head, the weight of the mission pressing against my soul. Then, his voice filled every part of my being. Tell them that Jesus is not just a man. Tell them that he is the way, the truth, and the life. Tell them that no one comes to me except through him. Tell them they must seek me now, while they still can. His words thundered through my soul, not as a command, but as a desperate plea. A plea from a loving father who was watching his children slip away. I had seen the lost souls. I had seen the lukewarm believers. I had seen the coming deception that would blind the world. Now, I understood. I wasn't being sent back for myself. I was being sent back for them. As his words settled into my spirit, I felt something shift. A force, gentle yet firm, began pulling me away. The light around me dimmed. The love that had surrounded me did not fade, but I felt myself being pulled back toward the world I had left behind. I reached out, trying to hold on to this moment, to his presence. Lord, please, don't let them be lost. His final words echoed in my soul as everything around me faded into darkness. I gasped, Air filled my lungs like fire. The blinding glow of hospital lights replaced the brilliance of heaven. Panicked voices surrounded me. "She's awake," a nurse shouted. "She had no pulse for 15 minutes," a doctor exclaimed, his face pale with disbelief. I could hear their words, but I wasn't listening, because I remembered everything. The light, the truth, the voice of God. I wasn't supposed to be here, but I had been sent back. Doctors rushed to my side, checking my vitals, shining lights in my eyes. None of it made sense to them. By medical standards, I should have suffered brain damage, organ failure, something, but I was perfectly fine. They asked me how I felt. I only had one answer. I need to tell people. As soon as I was strong enough to speak, I told my family what had happened. I saw God. I know the truth now. Jesus is not just a man. He is the Son of God. Some stared at me in awe, their eyes filling with tears. Some fell to their knees, crying out in repentance. But others shook their heads. "You were hallucinating," one relative muttered. "It was just your brain shutting down," a friend reasoned. "You were unconscious, Emily," another said, their voice full of pity. But I knew the truth, and I refused to stay silent. I started sharing my testimony wherever I could. Churches, online platforms, one-on-one conversations. Some listened, some didn't. But it didn't matter. I had to tell them, because I had seen what happens to those who ignore the truth. I had seen the lost souls. I had heard their cries of regret. I had felt the urgency of God's message. And I knew, the world is running out of time. If you are hearing this, this message is for you. You don't have forever to decide. One day, every knee will bow. The question is, will you bow willingly, or when it's too late? Jesus is not just a figure in history. He is alive. He is calling you, and he is waiting. Don't wait until you die to find out the truth, because by then, it won't be a choice. Seek him now.